it's Emily. Remember when we were talking about the Old Testament and the New Testament? Well, the Old Testament books include a lot of different kinds of writings. They say they're history, poetry, and legends, and laws, and very wise sayings, short stories, and then words of prophets. Remember we talked about the prophets? Well, the Old Testament books are really about God's special relationship with his chosen people. At different times, the people are called Hebrews or Israelites or Judeans or Jews. It's all the same word for the same people. And during their history, God comes to humans and he calls the chosen people. And those are the Jews, the chosen people, as their one and only God. He wants to be their one and only God, and he promises to bless them in a very special way. And he asks the chosen people to be faithful in following his commands and his commandments. The holy promise between God and the chosen people is called a covenant. That's a special word, covenant. And testament is another word for covenant. So the Old Testament is a story of the covenant between God and his special people, the Jews. Because of this, most of the books of the Old Testament are also the sacred scriptures of the Jewish people. Since the books were written in Hebrew, they're sometimes called the Hebrew scriptures. So the Old Testament isn't old because it's out of date. It's old because it's the story of how God first made his covenant with his chosen people. So, and then the Torah, remember the 5 books up there? They're the heart of the Old Testament. They have the stories of creation and the stories of how sin entered our world. They tell how God came through first to make his covenant with Noah and Abraham. And then in the book of Exodus tells how God led his people out of slavery through Moses. He told Moses, he whispered to him to come and get his people out. And Moses didn't want to, but he listened to God. And then at Mount Sinai, God said that all his chosen people, he could be part of the covenant. And he gave them the 10 Commandments. And we're learning about the 10 Commandments too. The historical books, these 16 books, they're mostly about the religious history and some short, stories or novels. They tell how the chosen people settled and eventually became a kingdom because all the people begged God for a king. And so they became led by kings like Saul and David and Solomon. But the rulers and the people usually worshipped false gods and ignored the poor. So God sent prophets like Elijah and to call the people to be faithful to the covenant. And the historical books have imaginative stories about heroes like Ruth and Tobit and Judith and Esther. It's exciting. They're exciting stories. The wisdom books, these 7 books have the collected wisdom of the chosen people. They have songs that they used in worship and prayer. They have advice for living a good and a holy life. And then the Song of Song has poetry about the goodness of being a man and a woman. And the book of Job, no, it's not Job, is about why good people suffer bad things. Yeah. So, and then the books of the prophets, these 18 books have the messages of important prophets. Remember, the prophets delivered God's message to the chosen people. They warned the chosen people against worshiping false gods, and then they challenged the chosen people to act fairly and care for the poor. The prophets also gave comfort and hope when the people thought God left them, and some of the prophets promised a future Savior, the Messiah, Jesus, who would bring God's love and justice and peace to the world. And so, to fully understand God's plan for the human race, we need both the Old and the New Testaments. In the Old Testament, God reveals the love He has for us, and the stories teach us how sin keeps us from being in a completely loving relationship with God. And the Old Testament shows how different people God came to put His chosen people on the right journey. The stories tell us and help us understand how Jesus fulfills God's promises to save us from sin and death. So that's what the Old Testament does. And then we'll talk about each book little by little, and you'll learn everything about the Bible that Mama Hen is teaching all of us. Okay? So come back again.